I've been listening to the recordings, Jonathan. So
jolly good. Well, you're up to date then. Well, I hope you've got a better memory than me, because this morning when I sat down to prepare this shiur, I could not remember for the life of me what we were talking about, and I had to go and listen to the last half of the last shiur to remind myself what we were talking about. And in fact, what we were talking about was the discussion about one word in the Torah, and that was whether we could derive the law of how many judges it was required to try an ox who was a gorer, in order to put this ox to death. Did we need the full 23 like we did for a human being who was accused of a capital offense? We know that there are 23 required for a person who is accused of a capital offense. We know that from our Mishnah. And I'm going to take you to the Mishnah to start with, as opposed to the Gemarah.
Jonathan, can I just interrupt a second?
Yes.
I'm assuming that when they say put the ox to death, they mean that it's not to be used for eating.
Ah, okay. Well, that's a very big assumption, because the Gemarah, the Torah actually tells us what you can do with the animal and what you can't do with the animal. We will see when we come to the Psukim. So the Torah does not make that assumption. It tells us explicitly what we can and can't do.
Right.
So we will come to that in a moment. Right, let's take you first of all to the Mishnah, not to the Gemarah, but right the way back to the Mishnah. I hope you can see that now. And we are over here, okay? Dinei nefashot be'esrim u'shlosha. Capital cases are dealt with by 23 judges, okay? And then we were discussing this unpleasant situation. Harovea v'hanirba, somebody who has performs a sexual act with an animal, either passively or actively, is judged by 23 people, 23 judges. And it quotes the pasuk in Vayikra that says, "V'harakta et ha'isha," and you shall kill the woman, v'et ha'behema, and the animal. And then it goes on, and it says, "And the animal shall be killed." And so the Steinsaltz Gemarah helps us out. This is the Mishnah, and says, in cases of bestiality, the verse juxtaposes the execution of the animal to the execution of the person, and therefore the case of the animal is adjudicated in the same way as cases of capital law. That was the Mishnah. Now, I'm going to whiz us on to where we were up to in the Gemarah. It's on page 80 in the Steinsaltz Gemarah, if you want to follow it inside. And we were having a discussion between Abaye and Rava as to whether this was in fact the case, that 23 judges were required for the animal. And we stopped in the middle of a ping-pong argument between the two of them. Last time we learned 2 weeks ago. And we were talking about a verse in the Torah, and I'm going to show you the verse in a minute. But this is where we're up to, if you get that ready, page 8. So now I'm just going to take you to the verse in the Torah that we were talking about. Here it is. I'll just share the screen. It is in Parashat Mishpatim. Marcel, you should recognize this.
Yes.
It is over here. We're talking about the goring ox, okay? Jeffrey's not here because he's in England, so I'll do the reading. So the Torah says, "V'im shor nagachu mitmol shilshom." If this is a habitually goring bull, mitmol shilshom, from yesterday, you can see the word etmol there. Yeah, you know that word. Etmol means yesterday. There is, in Hebrew, there is a word, a special word for the day before yesterday. We don't have one in English. We have to say the day before yesterday. But in Hebrew, the day before yesterday is called shilshom. Why do you think it's called shilshom? Anybody? What can you? What word can you see in there that will give you a clue?
Three.
Yes, shalosh. 3 days.
3 days ago.
Today, yesterday, the day before yesterday. So 3 days. So shilshom is a special Hebrew word which we don't have in English, and it means the day before yesterday. So when it says if this ox is a gorer from yesterday and the day before, that means that he is a habitual gorer. He's done it before. He's got form, as they say. Okay? V'hu'ad bivalav, and his owner has been warned to keep a guard on him, because obviously, if you know that this is a dangerous ox, you've got to look after him. V'lo yishmerenu, and the owner did not look after him properly. V'himit ish o isha, and then the ox killed a man or a woman. Hashor yisakel, the ox shall be stoned. V'gam ba'alav yumat, and also its owner shall die. Yumat, shall die. Okay, now, if you remember, Abaye and Rava were arguing about this one word that I've highlighted there, yumat, shall be put to death or shall die. Because they said, well, hang on a minute, the Torah does not waste any words. Why do we need the word yumat? We could just say, Ashur yisakel, the ox shall be stoned, the gamba alav, and also its owner. You wouldn't say, hang on a minute, there's a bit missing there. So why do we need that word yumat? So the argument that goes, we need that word yumat because we know it's not really necessary to tell us that he's going to be put to death, because we could have just said, and also its owner. It's there to teach us something. And says Abaye, says Rava says that word yumat is there to teach us that the manner of the death of the owner is the same as the manner of the death of the ox. Now, at the end of last week's shiur, Johnny asked the question and said, what do you mean the manner? That means the way it's killed. And we said, no, what it meant was the manner of the trial, the method of the trial. So Rava says that this extra word yumat is there to teach us that just as a human being, if he's going to have a capital punishment, has to be tried by 23 judges, the juxtaposition, or the sticking next to one another, of the ox and the person is to tell us that the punishments are meted out only if the manner of the court is the same, i.e. 23 judges. Abaye, on the other hand, says, what are you talking about? It says what it says. It's there to teach you that the owner should be put to death. And why do we need it? And you're going to tell me, well, we don't need that word. Well, we do need that word, because what happens to the ox in this situation? Hashor yisakel, he is stoned. Now, the argument is then put forward that if it just said the gamba alav and also its owner, you would then correctly assume that the method of execution would, for the man who owns the ox, would be what?
Stoning.
Stoning, correct. But it isn't, is it? It can't be. why can't it be stoning for the owner of the ox that kills somebody? The Gemarah tells us this. Let's see who remembers it from last time. What was the argument that
there were different degrees of killing somebody on there?
The different degrees of executing somebody.
Yes.
Correct.
Yeah.
Correct. Now, what is the Torah's punishment for killing a human being? So somebody kills another person, and let's say he fulfills all the categories. He was warned, and there were 2 witnesses, and it goes to a court of 23 judges. He's found guilty. How is he executed for killing a person? Anyone know?
He's strangled or hung.
No, he's not strangled.
No, right, okay. A sword.
Sword, correct. By the sword, he's beheaded. Okay. Now, there is a hierarchy of punishments. There's a hierarchy of different types of execution. I'm going to take you to the Steinsaltz Gemarah now, because that gives us in the side notes, it tells us some interesting stuff. Let me just share you the Steinsaltz Gemarah. There it is. So the punishment for a person that kills another person is the sword. Okay. Now, there is a hierarchy. The worst punishment that you can get is what?
Stoning.
Stoning, correct. And there are 3 others. Anybody know what the others are? We've mentioned 2. Johnny mentioned strangulation and the sword.
Skila, Sarefa, burning.
Sarefa, that's the 4th one, burning. Yeah. So it goes like this, in order of severity. Worst punishment you can get is stoning. The second worst punishment you can get is burning. The other 2, strangulation and beheading, there is a machloket as to which is considered more severe than the other, and you'll see that in the Gemarah coming up. Okay, but what there is no disagreement about is that stoning is the worst. Now, the argument is that if we did not have that word yumat at the end of the pasuk, shall be put to death. Let me take you back to the pasuk again. Now we're doing a lot of flitting back and forth here, but it's worth it. So if we look in the pasuk and we just said, Hashor Yisakel, the owner should be, the ox should be stoned, the gamba alav, and also its owner, full stop, you would say the owner is stoned. But that can't be, can it? Because you, inverted commas, only get beheading for killing a person. How can it be, says Rava, how can it be that you would get a worse punishment for having an ox that killed somebody than killing somebody yourself? It's not logical. It doesn't make any sense. Okay, if you with your own bare hands kill somebody, you get beheaded. It's not logical to say that you get a worse punishment, stoning, for having an ox that killed somebody. That's one step removed. So Rava says you can't say that you don't need that. Abaya says you can't say you don't need that word yumat to teach you that the owner is put to death. Because if you didn't have it, you would think he was stoned, and he can't be stoned. So that word yumat, says Abaya, comes along to teach us something else. And that is that we need 23 judges for an ox. Okay, that is where we left it last time. Okay, that's where we left it last time. So now I'm going to take, yes, Johnny.
I've got only a minor detail on the pasuk. Why did it say a man or a woman? Why did it say, why can't it say a person?
Okay, very good, Johnny. I also thought of that, but I only thought of that question just now as I was reading it out.
So did I.
Now, so it's a good question. What's your answer?
So there's a reason for it, because there's no superfluous words.
Correct. Okay. What is? I'll tell you what. I'll tell you why I think it says that. What is the Hebrew word for a person?
Person's,
Ben Adam.
Ben Adam is a person. That's right. What gender is Ben Adam?
I thought masculine, but
Masculine, because it's Ben Adam. Otherwise, it would be Bat Adam. Okay. Okay. So, what is the Hebrew word for? This is very, very contemporary. What is the Hebrew word for a non-binary human being? In other words, somebody who is neither a man or a woman, i.e., a person. What's the Hebrew word for a person?
Tam.
Okay. Anybody know?
Something.
No, of course you don't know, because there isn't one.
Oh.
There isn't one. Okay. Because everything in Hebrew is either masculine or feminine. So, Johnny, your question could only really have been asked
Jonathan,
by
the Gemarah does speak about non-gender.
Say that again, Marcel.
The Gemarah does speak about people who are non-gender. They don't know what gender they are.
Yes, we're talking. Yes, it does. It talks about hermaphrodites and tumtumim and all those kind of things. But that's not what we're talking about. So your question, Johnny, could only be asked by a speaker of a language that has a word that incorporates both genders, like the word person. Okay.
Yeah.
So nowadays, when you receive a business email from somebody, right, the person can be called Fred, or she can be called I don't know, Julia,
Frida.
Whatever, Frida. And at the bottom of the email, it says, my pronoun is his/he, or they/whatever it is. You have to now be told what you have to call these people. It's not good enough that they look like a bloke or they've got a bloke's name. You can't assume anything. So here in this pasuk, we cannot make a differentiation. How would it be if it just said, V'lo yishmerenu v'heimit ish? He didn't look after this ox and it killed a man. What would the Gemarah say? What about if he killed a woman? Right? Maybe the ox only gets put to death if he kills a man. And then if it would have said v'heimit isha, a woman, if it killed a woman, you would have said to me, well, what about if he kills a man? Maybe he only gets put to death if he kills a woman. So the answer to your question is that the Gemarah, the Torah was taking no chances. Man or woman, if the ox kills a person, there's no Hebrew word for person in a non-gender way. So it has to say both. So the answer to your question is that you are English and you speak English, and therefore you asked that question. I thought of the question myself as we were reading it. That, I think, is the answer. That's my answer anyway. I think it's the simplest answer. But I can't see any way that the Torah could have said that without us raising questions as to whether there was a difference between man and a woman. So there is no difference. And it's very interesting, of course, because there are those that would try and say that the Torah puts less of a value on the life of a woman than a man. And you might therefore have thought that killing a woman is not as important as killing a man. And the ox didn't get stoned if he killed a woman. The Torah tells us very clearly, man and woman are equal in this scenario. If an ox kills them, then the ox is stoned. So that's thank you for that question, Johnny. It gave me an opportunity to give that answer. Right. So where were we? Yes. So we have said now that the animal cannot be stoned because, sorry, the owner cannot be stoned because that's a worse punishment than the punishment of beheading, which you get for killing a person. I was going to show you the Steinsaltz Gemarah. That's where we were up to. I was going to show you the Steinsaltz Gemarah. They made some little background notes. Let me share that with you now. And you can see about the different types of sentence that a person gets. Here we go. We're on page 79 at the bottom if you want to look inside. Stoning. Okay, on the right-hand side here of the page. Stoning is one of the 4 methods of execution imposed by the court mentioned in the Torah, and is considered by halakha to be the most severe of the death penalties. Now, for what do you get this most severe punishment? Okay, the prohibitions that entail the death penalty punishable by stoning include incest with one's mother, male homosexual intercourse, cursing God, cursing one's parents, idol worship, the desecration of Shabbat, and adultery with a betrothed young woman. So you can see, because that is the most severe punishment a person can get, the Torah is telling us that these particular sins are as bad as it gets. Okay, and so you can see in the middle of there the very politically incorrect opportunity here, male homosexual intercourse. And of course, that is the basis of the halakha that prohibits the homosexual act. Now, Rav Steinsaltz has been very careful to actually use the word intercourse there, so that we are not talking about the desires or anything else other than the act itself. So the male homosexual act of intercourse is punishable, according to the Torah, by skila, by stoning. Let's go down. Execution by the sword, sayif. Decapitation by the sword is one of the 4 methods of capital punishment imposed by the court. And who gets this? A murderer. We've already said that, haven't we? Somebody who kills a person gets killed by the sword. The inhabitants of an idolatrous city, Ir Hanidachat. Those who rebel against the king, Mored B'malchut. And when we come very shortly, we will come in the Tanakh Shiur, we will come to the ins and outs of David HaMelech and Shaul HaMelech, and you will see how somebody who is Mored B'malchut, somebody who is rebellious against the king, is punishable by death, and the death sentence they get is the sword. Okay, that's 2. And the third one that Rav Steinsaltz gives us a bit of background on is chenek, strangulation. We mentioned this briefly in last time's shiur of how it happens. Strangulation is the least severe of the 4 types of capital punishment administered by the court. That's not 100% agreed, but that's how we paskin. You'll see in the Gemarah shortly that there is an opinion that beheading actually is less severe, but for our purposes at the moment, strangulation is the least severe of the 4 types of capital punishment, and this is how it was done. A scarf was wrapped around the violator's neck, and then there's one person on either end of the scarf, and you carry on pulling until he expires. And the people that get this punishment, somebody who strikes his father or mother, a kidnapper, a rebellious elder. We spoke about the rebellious elder a few weeks ago. Do you remember? A zaken mamrei. We spoke about the rebellious elder, a false prophet, and most adulterers, including a man who committed adultery with a priest's daughter. They get strangulation. Okay, Rav Steinsaltz for some reason doesn't tell us about shreifah, but that was the other one is burning, and we'll get to that eventually in I don't know how many years' time, because it is on page 84 of Gemarah Sanhedrin. So at this rate, what are we? We've done 14 pages in 3 years. So at this rate, we've got another 70 pages to go, which would take about another 23 years to get to that. If you can't wait that long, you can look it up. It's on page 84b. Right. So let's go on in the Gemara. So that's where we're up to. So it says there that we're now at the point where Abaya's question that is, why not interpret the Mishnah literally to mean that the owner is put to death? We need that Yumat to tell us literally, because if you didn't have it, you would think he would be stoned, and that can't be the case. That's where we got to last time. Now, I'll just show you right at the bottom of page 79 in the Steins. That's over here where my pointy thing is running around. This is what we've just done in the Gemara, and then we'll carry on new stuff. Ikatav Rachmana Hachi. If the Torah, remember we spoke about the word Rachmana last time, Rachmana meaning the merciful one, it's the name of Hashem. If Hashem had written just that, i.e., it didn't say the owner shall be put to death, it just said, and also the owner, Hava Amina, I might have believed. What word can you see in there? Hava Amina.
It's faith.
Yeah, okay. You say it many, many, many times in the day. What do you say?
Amen.
Amen. And what does that mean? Amen.
Yeah, Ne'eman, that's the word I was looking for.
Yeah, Ne'eman is the faithful one. That's right. It's the same root. Amen means when somebody says a bracha, blessed are you, Hashem, say Amen. Yes, I agree. I agree. I think so too. That's what I agree means. I think so too. Amen means, yes, I agree. I think so too. So, Hava Amina, I might have thought, Biskila, that he would be killed by stoning. Says the Gemara, Biskila Salka Datoch. Could it possibly enter your mind to say that he would be killed by stoning? Katal Ihu B'Sayif. If he killed himself with his own hands, he gets killed by the sword. Mamono Baskila. Would it enter your mind that if his property, i.e. the ox, would kill somebody, that he would get stoned, a more severe punishment? Can't be, says Abaye. So now we have another question of the Gemara. We're at now on the top of page 80 here. V'dilma, but perhaps, asks the Gemara, Hai de katav Rachmana Yumat, the fact that it said Yumat, actually used the word Yumat, shall be put to death, la'akule ilave, so that it has come la'akule. What word can you see in there? Yes, Julia, I think you're saying it.
Cal.
Is it the word for light?
Cal, correct, light.
Cal.
Yes. Yesterday I was it yesterday? Yeah, yesterday I was in, no, I wasn't. 2 days ago, I was in Yerushalayim, and there were these trains going on on the street. What are they called? What is that railway called?
Light rail.
The light rail. And how do you say that in Hebrew, Marcel?
Rakevet Kala.
Rakevet Kala. Kal means light. So here says the Gemara asks, maybe the word Yumat there is to be lenient, to be light with him. La'afuke misayef lechenek. To remove him. La'afuke means to remove him from the category of beheading, which is what you would get if you killed the person by your own hands. You would expect, I think it's logical to suggest, that your punishment for having an ox that killed somebody should be less severe than if you killed them yourself. We've already said it can't possibly be stoning because that's more severe. That's completely illogical. But it's further logical to say that the punishment you should get should be less severe than if you killed somebody with your own hands. If you kill somebody with your own hands, you get beheaded with a sword. So, says the Gemara, perhaps, so the word yumat is to take him out of the category of being beheaded and into the category of chenek, of strangulation, because strangulation is the least severe method of death penalty. So that's logical, isn't it? So you get beheaded if you kill somebody with your own hands. And at this point in the argument of the Gemara, the suggestion is that this extra word yumat is to teach us that you don't get beheaded if you have an ox that kills somebody, you get strangled instead, which is less severe. Okay, says the Gemara, okay, ha-nicha, that's okay, leman da'ama, to the one who says chenek chamor, that says that strangulation is more severe than the sword. Okay. According to the opinion that there's no place for such a claim, as the punishment is certainly not more severe than that of an actual murderer. But according to the one who says that strangulation is a lighter punishment, why would you need that? So what he's saying is this: if you hold that chenek, strangulation, is more severe than the sword, then you need to have yumat if you're going to take him out of the category of sayef and put him into chenek. Doesn't make sense, really. So you would need something to tell you that. But the one that says that strangulation is the least severe, why would you need that? It's obvious. It's obvious because you wouldn't get the same severity of punishment for killing him yourself, for killing him with an animal as for killing him yourself. So you wouldn't need it. You could deduce it on your own. So that's the Gemara's question at the moment. So at this point, Abaya's question raises again. So why not use this yumat to tell you the simple literal translation that an ox's owner is subject to execution? Because it is a bit of a chidush, really, isn't it? It's a bit of a thing to say that the owner of an ox should be put to death. You'd expect maybe and he would be able to, I don't know, he'd have to pay a fine or something like that. Bit harsh to say that the owner of an ox should be responsible for. So it's a bit like a car, right? You've got a car and your car goes out of control and you're not in it. You forget, you get out of the car and you forget to put the handbrake on, and it rolls down the hill and chas v'chalila kills somebody. You wouldn't expect to get the death penalty for that. That's not first degree premeditated murder. Might be manslaughter, but you wouldn't expect to get the death penalty. So says Abaya, I need this ba'alav yumat to tell me a chidush. I need it to tell me quite simply what it says, that the owner will be put to death. Now, along comes another, what's the expression? Spoke in the wheel. Chizkiah. Okay, we've got a different opinion here now. What about, oh no, that's later on, Chizkiah. What about, what about this? Rava says now, this is Rava, and he says, what are you on about? He says, Lo salka daitach dichtiv. It can't be like you say that it's there to teach you that the man gets put to death, because we have another pasuk immediately afterwards. Let me take you back to the Chumash, to the psukim themselves. And we're in Shemot, chapter 29. No, chapter 1, verse 29 and 30. There it is. Okay. Now, here's our pasuk. Our pasuk. If it is a habitually goring bull since yesterday and the day before yesterday, and its owner had been warned, but he did not guard it, and it kills a man or a woman, the bull shall be stoned and its owner shall be put to death. Verse 30. Im kofa yushat alav, insofar as a ransom shall be levied upon him, v'natan pidyon nafsho k'chol asher yushat alav. He shall give the redemption of his soul according to all that is levied upon him. What does that mean? What does that verse mean? In simple terms. Yes,
Pays
Johnny?
a fine instead of being killed.
Yeah. It's a get-out clause.
Yeah.
The Torah tells us, yes, he shall be put to death, but there is a get-out clause. The get-out clause is you can redeem the death penalty by paying a hefty fine, a ransom. Okay, kofer. What's the root of the word kofer?
Atonement.
Atonement. That's right. It is the same root. So in kofa yushatav alav, in order to atone for this terrible sin of allowing your ox to kill somebody, you can pay a ransom in order to atone for that sin. That's what the pasuk says, right? Agreed?
Yeah.
Okay. Now, I've just whizzed you over to Parashat Mas'eh on the screen, and there is a verse that says this: whoever kills a person based on the testimony of witnesses, he shall slay the murderer. A single witness may not testify against a person so that he should die. You shall not accept ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, for he shall be put to death. So that verse tells you what? That if you are chayav mita, you are a murderer, and you have been sentenced to the death penalty, you cannot pay a fine and get out of it. That is an explicit pasuk in the Torah. You shall not accept ransom for the life of a murderer who is guilty of death, for he shall be put to death. Okay?
That's for killing a person, then.
Exactly. Exactly. So that's our Gemarah now. Our Gemarah is going to quote this pasuk. Let's go back to the Gemarah. There we go, back to the Gemarah. So says Rava, don't even think that it means like Abaye says, which is that the owner is put to death. How can it be? He quotes, Rava quotes the pasuk that we've just said. If a ransom be placed upon him, then he shall give the redemption. In other words, then you can redeem yourself in the ox case. And if you would say that he is somebody who is bar katala, he is somebody who is going to be put to death. In other words, he's a condemned man. Well, we've got a pasuk that says you can't take a ransom for a condemned man. So, therefore, it can't mean, like you say, Abaye, that verse is to teach us that he gets put to death. Because if he's going to get put to death, you wouldn't be able to accept a ransom. And the next verse says you can accept a ransom. Now, Abaye is rather clever on this. Abaye says, excuse me, Abaye says, no. Over here now. Abaye says, you're wrong, Rava. He says, Adarabba. What does that mean? Adarabba. On the contrary, Adarabba, it's also a modern Hebrew word. It's used in modern Hebrew. Adarabba. On the contrary, Mishum hi gufa. That's exactly why we do need to be told, Ba'alav yumat, the owner is put to death. Katal ihu lo tiske le b'mamona. So he says, and the Steinsaltz explains it very nicely. On the contrary, the additional phrase of Ba'alav yumat in the verse is necessary due to this argument itself. If one killed a person himself, okay, Katal ihu, if he killed a person himself with his own hands, la tiske le b'mamona. It's not enough for him to make a payment for money. You can't. The verse in Parshat Masei tells you very clearly, you killed somebody, like Johnny pointed out, that's if you kill a person with it yourself. You can't pay a fine and get out of it. Katal shoro, but if his ox killed somebody, lifrok nafshei b'mamuna, the Torah tells you you can get out of it by paying a fine. Okay, so says Abaya at this point, no, you're wrong. I still need that verse to tell me that the guy's put to death. He's not put to death like the man who kills a person himself, because he can't get out of it. The next verse tells me that yes, if you don't pay a fine, you'll be put to death. The Torah says it the other way around. You're going to be put to death, but you can pay a fine to get out of it. Bottom line is, you want to get out of death penalty? Here's your ransom. It's a bit like bail, I suppose. You want to get out of prison for the time being? You pay your bail. You can't raise the bail, you stay in prison. You can't pay the fine here, you get the death penalty. That's Abaya's view here. Now, Chizkiah comes along. And he says something very clear, which does not support Abaya, but does support Rava. And he says quite simply, Ela Amar Chizkiah. Now, Chizkiah says, V'chein Tana Debei Chizkiah, and this is what was taught in the house, i.e. the school of Chizkiah. There is a verse, a makra, a pasuk in, there we go, Numbers 35:21. Let's get it on the screen. 35:21. I've got it ready. Where have I put it? 35:21. Where is it? Vayikra 35:21. Bamidbar 30. There it is. Bamidbar 35:21. Hang on, I can't find it now. Here, I found it. Hang on, found it. There we go. 35:21 in Parashat Maseh, a bit further up from what we saw just before. If he maliciously struck him with his hand and he died, the assailant shall be put to death. He is a murderer. The blood avenger may kill the murderer when he meets him. That's another halacha we're not going to get involved in. But look what it says. Oh, be'eva hikahu beyado. If be'eva means hatred, so maliciously. He maliciously, i.e. premeditated, first degree murder. Hikahu beyado. He did it with his own hand. Doesn't necessarily mean with his hand. He could do it with a gun, or he could do it with a stick or whatever. But it means by his hand. And he dies. Mot yumat hamakeh. The striker should be put to death. Why? Rotseahu. He's a murderer. So, says Chizkiah, he learns from that. Why does it not just say, if somebody kills somebody else, then he gets put to death? What do we need this business? Hikahu biyado. He kills it with his hand. You know where I'm going with this, don't you? Chizkiah says, because it specifies with his hand, meaning that if it's done through a third party, i.e. the ox, he does not get put to death at all. So Chizkiah comes along and supports Rava's argument. Let's go back to the Gemarah and see what the Gemarah actually says. There we go. Amar Chizkiah, Amakra, the verse says, our verse I've just showed you, Mot, Yumat, Amakeh, Rotzeach, Hu. He that struck him shall be put to death, he is a murderer, from which it is inferred you execute him for his act of murder, but you do not execute him for his ox's act of murder, because it's not by his hand. Okay, and that is where the subject of Abaya and Rava ends. It seems that Rava wins the day. Abaya remains silent now. He doesn't actually say that Abaya agrees with Rava, but the Gemarah does not come back with any further ping pong. That was a forward smash by Rava, and Abaya does not seem to be able to return that shot. And Chizkiah comes along and puts his 2 penneth within to support Rava, and it would seem that the words Ba'alav Yumat are to be taken that the ox, which is sentenced to death, but it's not really sentenced to, the ox is sentenced to death, and the person is also sentenced to death, but it's not really sentenced to death because he can get out of it with money. But that word Ba'alav Yumat, according to Rava, we need it to teach us the manner of the trial of the ox. So we are at this point, and it's important that we understand that at this point in the Gemarah, we are agreed that it takes 23 judges to judge an ox, which is a habitual gorer. Okay, Michael's shaking his head. Why are you shaking your head, Michael?
It seems a little bit ridiculous to have 23 judges for an ox. That should be reserved for serious punishment, a human thing, rather than for an ox who kills.
Wouldn't it be the same 23 judges as are judging the person, the owner, anyway?
Wouldn't it be the same? Well, it might be. You would have thought that it might be, because it would save time, wouldn't it? They've heard the case. Don't know. David, are you going to tell us something about that?
Have a look at, because this was bothering me until you got to the conclusion of Chizkiah, what is going on with Abaye. Have a look at Rashi on the pasuk that we've been learning in Mishpatim. That's chapter 21, verse 29.
Okay,
and it's very, very clear.
Let's get it up. There we are. There's Shmot 29. Let's put the Rashi on. We can put Rashi on the screen. Give me a sec. Show Rashi, verse 29. The Rashi is a bit small on the screen, so I'll read it. I'll get it up for you anyway.
Okay, on V'gamba alav yumat.
Okay, V'gamba alav yumat. Rashi helps us out very nicely here, and this would. This is where Chizkiah comes in, because Rashi quotes the pasuk that Chizkiah has just quoted about put to death if you do it by your hand. Let's see what Rashi says exactly. Gam ba'alav yumat, and also its owner shall be put to death, bidei shamayim, through the hands of heaven, literally. That means that HaKadosh Baruch Hu will see to it that he gets punishment of death. And in brackets, in the translation, and not through a court.
Correct.
Yachol, I might have thought bidei Adam. I might have thought that it means that he will be put to death, but he's liable for the death penalty by the hands of man, i.e. by a court, i.e. through a court, says Rashi in brackets. Well, says the translator in brackets. Talmud Loma. Therefore, the Torah teaches us in the pasuk that Chizkiah just quoted, Mot yumat hamakeh rotzeach hu. He gets put to death. He is a murderer. Who is a murderer? The one that does it with his
first degree.
Yeah, al retzichato. ata horgo. On his murder, i.e. the murder that he does himself, he gets put to death. Ve'i ata horgo, and you do not kill him, i.e. human beings don't put him to death. Al ritzichat shoro, for the murder that is committed by his bull, by his ox. So Rashi here summarizes the whole Abaya and Rava argument by quoting the bottom line, which is Chizkiah's comment in the Gemarah, that the verse in Bamidbar 35:21 that we just read in Parashat Mas'eh is to teach us that you only get human court death penalty for murdering somebody yourself, not for the ox. But when it says the owner shall be put to death, he doesn't get away scot-free. It means that Hashem will see to it. So I don't know if it was meant to be, let's say, what did we say his punishment was? We said his punishment was by strangulation. So maybe, God forbid, the owner of this ox will get trapped in a lift and there'll be no oxygen, or he'll get trapped in the hull of a boat that's overturned and there'll be no oxygen, and he will die of lack of oxygen, and it's the same as strangulation. So that's what it means when a person is killed bidei shamayim. HaKadosh Baruch Hu sorts out all the cheshbonos. He knows what he's doing, and who knows what happens to us, why, etc. Only HaKadosh Baruch Hu knows that. And we rely, as it were, the Torah is telling us, V'gam ba'alav yumat. This is the bottom line. This is what Rashi says. This is what Chizkiah says. Bottom line is, and the owner will be put to death. You can leave it to me, says God. I'll sort it out. You don't put him to death. And that, Michael, answers your question, because we don't need to have 23 judges for God to decide what's going on. But the next piece of Gemarah assumes that we still have the 23 judges. We may still have those 23 judges, by the way. I'll come to you in a sec, David. We may still have those 23 judges, because if he's going to if the other guy's going to pay a fine, he's going to need to pay a fine. Then we need to know what the case is. Did he kill did the ox kill the person? Did he not kill them? We still need to have a trial. We might not carry out the punishment of capital punishment on the ox. We might leave that to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. No, I mean to the owner. We might leave that to HaKadosh Baruch Hu. But we still need to try the ox. We still need to know what's going on with the ox. And at the moment, the argument is that the Gemarah is at the point where we need 23 judges to try an ox, and that's important for the next piece of Gemarah, which we'll start in a second, just to give us a taster after we've heard from David. Yes, David.
Yeah, so what disturbed me as we were going through this Gemarah was Abaye's stance, because what Rashi's doing here, he's quoting directly, the Rashi here is a direct quote from the Mechilta, and the Mechilta is from Mishneh times and is halakha l'maaseh. Okay, at that time, there's no other opinion in the Mechilta. And this is the Mechilta's interpretation of the Gamba alav yumat. Why aren't those words superfluous? It's to teach us, in the case of accidental murder or second-degree murder, that the owner doesn't get tried by the Bet Din. He can't be punished by the Bet Din. He's punished b'dei shamayim. And the verses that you quoted from Parashat Mas'eh in the Shir, that whole section there is dealing with the Arei Miklat and the cases where someone's allowed to go to the Arei Miklat, which is accidental murder. And even though the accidental murderer will get refuge in the Arei Miklat, he doesn't get off scot-free. That just like our case here of the ox that's gored habitually, the owner will come and meet an untimely death, bidei shamayim. It'll be midah keneged midah, as you explained. Similarly, in the cases of Arei Miklat described in Parashat Masei, the accidental murderer there will also get some kind of a fatal accident happening to him, bidei shamayim.
Okay, so I've got a question that I want to ask you in a minute, but I've just got on the screen. Can you see the screen at the moment? Yeah, so we're in this Parashat Masei here, and just a few psukim down here. This is the one we just quoted, 21. If he maliciously struck him with his hand and he died, he's put to death. Now, the next verse, but if he pushed him accidentally without malice, so this is not premeditated murder, this is an accident, or he threw an object at him without premeditation, or with any stone which is deadly without seeing its victim. So you're working on a building site and you chuck a big stone down from the scaffolding, and you weren't careful, you didn't look carefully enough to see there was nobody there, and it strikes somebody and it kills them. This is what they're talking about here. He was not his enemy and he bore him no malice. It was just a terrible accident. It was careless and it's manslaughter, but it's not murder. Correct. So what happens then is then they can run to the city of refuge, and he stays there till the Kohen Gadol dies. And so that's what David was referring to about the person who kills it, or who kills accidentally. And we learn this combination of things teaches us. Let me just turn this phone off. This combination teaches us the halachot of bidei shamayim, mita bidei shamayim, death penalty by the hands of God. In other words, as David very clearly put it, some fatal accident will happen to him, and it will be in a method of the kind of death that he might have got had he been found guilty by a court. So that's what David was talking about there. Now, I've got a question for you, David, and it's really your question, but I don't know the answer. Abaye obviously knew the Mechilta.
Yeah.
So why is he making such a spirited attempt to change the understanding if he knew the Mechilta same as Rava did? And the second question I have is, why has nobody quoted that Mechilta actually here in the Gemarah? I don't know the answer.
But your first question was exactly my question.
What exactly is the Mechilta, Johnny? Can you explain that?
Say again?
What exactly is the Mechilta?
The Mechilta was basically at the time of the Mishnah, the halachot were all being categorized, if you like, and the Mechilta was one of the books. There weren't really books at that time, but there was one of the collection of writings which gave us halacha l'maisa. It was a bit, if you like, it was the Shulchan Aruch of the time of the Mishnah.
Can I jump in there a second? The Mechilta is a midrash, and there's two types of midrash. There's a midrash agada, telling stories, so explaining the text with a number of stories, and there's a midrash which is teaching us halakha. And the midrash that teaches halakha, the first three, is the Mechilta, which is on Sefer Shemot, the Sifra, which is on Sefer Vayikra, and the Sifrei, which is on Bamidbar and Devarim. Why is there no halachic Mechilta? There's no halachic midrash on Bereshit, because there is no halacha in Bereshit. Whereas you'll find Agadic midrashim on all five books. And the Mechilta, the Sifra, and the Sifrei are the oldest midrashim that are in existence. And they, as Johnny said, are dated from the Tannaitic period. So it's not actually showing, presenting halakha l'maisa. It's just saying, what is the halakha that is derived from the psukim that the midrash is going through?
But effectively, it is presenting halakha l'maisa because it's the oldest. It's the oldest, and therefore, in our understanding, the most authentic. Which is why the question that David raised is an important question. Is Abaye is seemingly going against the Mechilta. Now, you know, there are certain rules, and we know the rule that an Amorah can't challenge a Tana. Somebody from the Gemarah can't challenge an opinion from the Mishnah. Mishnah is more authoritative, that's the word, than the Gemarah. The Gemarah might go and try and discuss what exactly does the Mishnah mean, which is what we're doing, but it can't challenge the fundamental authoritative statement. And the same with the Mechilta. The Mechilta is the oldest halakha l'maisa. In other words, that is how we paskin, so to speak. And it's an interesting question why Abaye is able to do it, and also it's an interesting question why the Gemarah doesn't actually quote that. I'm just to.
Can I ask? In all the years that we've been doing this, we've never previously come across the Mechilta, as far as I'm aware. So why, in this case, would we expect to do it now?
Because Abaye is going against what it says in the Mechilta, which is unusual. You wouldn't expect that. Normally, the Mishnaic bottom line, if you like, is what's the word? Corresponds to that which is written in the Mechilta, because it's
I've got the answer, Johnny.
Oh, excellent! What's the answer?
Because I've got the Mechilta in front of me. And the opinion that the owner should be put to death is Rabbi Akiva's. Okay, Rabbi Akiva compares the death of the ox to the death of its owner, just as the death of its owner can be decided only by a tribunal of 23 judges. So the death of the ox is to be decided by a tribunal of 23 judges.
Right. So that means that Abaye is relying on the opinion of Rabbi Akiva. Okay, and therefore we have that machloket between Abaye and Rava. Okay, I just want to, before we finish, I just want to show you the question that the Gemarah is going to ask next time. It's a very fascinating question. Not because of the question itself, but because of the further questions that it raises in a more general term. Now, you don't know what I'm talking about because I'm talking in riddles. So let me tell you what I'm talking about now. Let me show you the Gemarah, and this is what we're going to look at next time. Okay, so the question is this. Ibai Elahu, a question was asked. Shor Sinai Bekama, an ox which wandered onto Har Sinai at the time of Matan Torah. How many judges do we need to say it needs to be put to death? Okay, we know from the pasuk in Shmot chapter 19, the time of the giving of the Torah. What were we told? We were told that nobody's allowed to touch the mountain. Neither is an animal allowed to go and graze on it. Where do we learn? Where do we read that? And we read it a few times a year. Well, the animals were not allowed to graze on Har Sinai at the time of Matan Torah. When do we read that? Apart from it in its regular spot, I'll give you a clue. It's in Kitisa.
No, it's in Yitro.
Is it?
Yeah.
I'm talking about Vayechal.
No. It's in Shemot chapter 19.
Yeah, that's in the, yeah, but I'm talking about when we read that the animals couldn't graze. It's in Vayachal, isn't it? It says,
Oh,
don't
God,
go.
okay, that's the repetition. That's with the second Luchot.
But that's my question. My question is, when do we say it? Now I've given you the answer. It's Vayachal on a fast day.
But it's but the first time it occurs is in Yitro.
I know,
so
but we don't read that on a fast day, so that's not the right answer.
No, we read it on Shavuot.
Ah, okay, that is true. That is true. But you didn't read my mind, David. I was talking about Vayachal.
You didn't read my mind.
No, that's true. Okay, so anyway, we do know in two places that the animals were not allowed to go on the mountain on Har Sinai, and if they did, they got killed. Now, the Gemarah asks the question, how many judges do we need at Har Sinai if there was an ox that went on to the mountain? Now, that's the question that the Gemarah is going to ask next. And my question to you for next week, and if you want to look on, you can look on, or if you want to try and work it out for yourself, the answer is, who cares? Because it's never going to happen again. We're not going to have another Matan Torah, so who cares how many judges there were? Whether there were 1, 5, 7, 23, 71, who cares? This was back then. What difference does it make to us how many judges would have judged an ox had it been there on Mount Sinai when it shouldn't have been? That's the question for next time. And I just want to recap what we've done so that for next week I can remind myself. We finished the argument between Abaye and Rava as to what the words V'gam ba'alav yumat and also his owner should be put to death. We spoke about the Mechilta in some detail. We spoke about the concept of mita bidei shamayim, the death penalty by the hand of heaven as opposed to the hand of man, by some fatal accident occurring in a manner which would mimic the punishment you would get from the court. We also quoted the psukim that says if you are a murderer, you cannot get off by buying your way out of it. But that doesn't apply to the owner of an ox that kills. You can, and the Torah is explicit about that you can pay a ransom and get off for that. And that was the argument between Abaye and Rava. We ended the argument with Abaye not having a comeback, and Chizkiah was the one that brought the pasuk from Parashat Masei to say that it can't possibly be because of it didn't do it by his own hand. And so we've then left you with the question of who cares how many judges were required for an ox on Mount Sinai. Any questions on today's shiur? Any comments, questions?
Did we just witness a machloket between you and David?
No, we were both right. He was quoting the first time, and I had in my mind the second time because I had in my mind the laning that we do on a fast day, which is why I said we say it several times during the year. But he's also right because we say the other one several times, especially we say it at least twice anyway, don't we? We say it in Parshat Yitro and we say it on Shavuot. Do we say it any other time? I don't think we do we?
No.
Mine, if you say two, here's the machloket. If you say two is several, then David is right. If you say two is not several, two is only a couple, like I would say that several means at least three, then I was more accurate. So there's your machloket.
I'd agree with that.
So you see, you have to listen to the question very carefully. Very good. Very good. Thank you, everybody.
Johnny, can I just ask you, because you love words and the roots of words, the word adraba, on the contrary, is it daber back to front?
Adraba, is it daber back to front? What a great idea. I don't know. Adraba.
Because you like the roots of words.
I do. I mean, it must.
Daber back to front, so it's on the contrary.
It would be wonderful if it was. Let me try and make some research into that. That's a great observation, Johnny. That was definitely worth keeping at the end of the recording. Definitely. Right. Anybody that's got any evidence that Adarabba is daber backwards, meaning on the contrary, I want to hear about it. Excellent. Thank you, Johnny. Okay.
I would also